Hello, welcome to Mod Midwives, a Metro Midwifery podcast. I'm Gina Gerbath.
And I'm Nedra Hale, and we are home birth midwives serving the Denver metro area.
Well, we have a special treat for you today. We are going to interview Julia Amend.
First time, yeah.
Amend. Okay. I've known you for years and years and years, and I realized recently that I was saying your name wrong the whole time.
You're not the only one.
Okay. Many apologies. Anyway, Julia Amend is our associate midwife, and she'll often be at our clients' births as the assistant, and she's just an all-around awesome person. So we thought you might like to get to know her a little better today.
Yay!
So welcome, Julia.
Hi, it's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Good, yeah. So I don't know why it took us so long to do this. We kind of do interviews about once every, I don't know, what do you think, Nedra? Every 4 to 6?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
We've only done a handful of interviews, but anyway. Well, and plus I think people probably have some questions, when we tell them Julia's probably going to be at your birth. And of course that's changed with the COVID stuff. You're attending more of our births now. So it's kind of exciting.
I know, she's going to get really tired.
Over the next 2 months, for sure.
I'm ready. I've had a solid 2 weeks off of being called, so I'm ready.
Good. That's great. I know I've had 2 weeks off myself, so that's been kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about just kind of like where you come from and your kind of background information?
So my name is Julia Amend. I grew up here in Aurora, always called Colorado home and really love it here. And I actually started out my journey of attending birthing families by going to nursing school in Central Arkansas. I didn't realize that I was going to be so attracted to maternity and newborn care at that time, but I knew that nursing was something I wanted to do, that it sounded appealing. And through that process and traveling and seeing how midwifery care is done around the world, I got really interested in it. Sorry, I should say maternity care in general. I wasn't learning about midwifery at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But throughout my undergrad, I got really interested in the labor and delivery field. And I think like a lot of people in school, I was learning all of the ideals and all of the evidence-based concepts about how things are supposed to be. And I was really excited. I was completely ready to dive in. And so about 10 years ago, I was able to do that. Dove right into a hospital setting as a labor and delivery nurse. And on the one hand, I loved it. I was learning a lot of new things, but one of those new things is that typical day-to-day hospital care doesn't function quite like they tell you in school. And so it depends a lot on, well, first of all, where you are in the world, what kind of family you're born into, what kind of language you speak, but it also depends on what kind of hospital you end up with, what kind of provider is there when you arrive, not what kind of provider you've chosen necessarily, but who is there at that moment. And I realized that the evidence-based standards around me were nothing like, well, I shouldn't say nothing like, but not very similar to what I had been taught. And so most of the time, I would say it was a good experience, and I was able to be part of some really beautiful things and really beautiful experiences for people. But I also witnessed some pretty terrible things and realized that if I were to ever have a baby, this is not the kind of treatment that I would want. So I didn't really know at the time what the alternatives were. I was still very young and very new to this whole field, but I spent about 3 years in labor and delivery nursing, but then I started learning and reading more about midwifery and how it had been back in the 60s and before that, and then what it was turning into today. I got an opportunity to spend a year abroad with a midwifery internship. And that was pretty much what turned the tables for me and helped me realize that, okay, as much as I appreciate the birth workers who want to be change agents within the hospital system, I don't think that's for me. I think personally, I decided that I wanted to be a part of making out of hospital options available for as many people as possible. And so that was in 2014. I came back to the States. I reconnected with some midwives that I already knew of in Colorado. Kind of went back and forth for a little bit about specifically what type of midwife I wanted to be, but the stars aligned for me to finish my apprenticeship in pursuit of a CPM. And so that was a few years of work. And then I got licensed by the state a little over a year ago.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember talking to you really when you first, it must have been right when you first came back, and I just didn't know it at the time, but
yeah,
you were still deciding, you were still in the decision-making process. And I remember saying, you should become a nurse midwife.
Yeah.
Because you already had your BSN.
Like run while you still can.
That was exactly my thought.
You were also still in the deciding process when it came to taking on students. And I think at the moment you were very much in the mindset of, oh, no more students.
I can't remember where in my student progression our conversation happened, but I think I had just had a not great experience with a student, and I don't remember which one it was.
And I think I understood that too, because I had not yet been in an individual student preceptor relationship, but I had been in that group setting and had kind of witnessed firsthand how stressful that can be. And so I think that's why I was still a little bit on the fence too. And I thought, well, if I start researching now, then maybe in a couple of years when I'm ready, I'll know where and how to land.
But you must have found something a lot faster than a couple of years.
It was probably about a year after I talked with you that I connected with Anita Tupper. Okay. And that was unexpected because I had talked with her, actually worked with her. Anita Tupper and I worked together in Cambodia for a couple months. And it sounded for all the world like she was about to retire. So when I moved back here, I didn't even think about contacting her, but I actually heard through word of mouth that she was taking on clients and potentially a student again. So I jumped right into that one.
Yeah, cool. So maybe I know we have to protect confidentiality and all of that, but I wonder if you would share, a story, maybe a story from the hospital days, maybe a story from your international travel, just one of those things that I think that many times as midwives, we have these kind of aha moments. And maybe what was one of the times that you started to feel clarity around wanting to be a CPM versus a CNM?
About clarity about wanting to be a CPM versus a CNM. I think it was anything that solidified my mind about wanting to do home births, because I was starting to understand that even though it's possible, it's very difficult for CNMs in this state to do that. And I think one instance, I'm trying to think of times when I was in the birth world, but also realized that a midwife is definitely what I want to be. And what comes to mind is a birth in Summit County, up in Frisco, because I worked there as a travel nurse for a few months in 2014, and they had, at least had at the time, a certified nurse midwife who works at that hospital along with several OBs. And I saw my first in-hospital birth that happened on hands and knees. And it was that there shouldn't be anything profound about that, but that was pretty profound. but it also emphasized to me how many hoops the CNM had to jump through in order to facilitate making that happen. And again, it doesn't sound like that should be a hard thing, but it very much was, and she faced a lot of disapproval in that setting for that. And so that's part of what made me think that I saw this plenty of times overseas, and it seems like a really good way to facilitate whichever way people want to birth their babies. And I was really grateful to see an example of that happening in the hospital too. But it also was humbling to me to look at her and realize, oh, you're working really hard to make this happen for people. So I also think I realized that maybe for better or for worse, that's not part of my personality, and I would just rather remove myself from that context a little more. Not that we don't still advocate for humane and evidence-based practices in the hospital, but I was getting more of a realistic view of,
it's not the uphill or upstream swim as much.
Right. And I think getting a view of your chosen career in practice is a whole lot better than being in school, because that's the big culture shock that I faced being in nursing school versus actually being an RN, was that matter of, oh, this job doesn't look like I thought it would. I think another example would be a travel contract I did at Presbyterian, and there was a lady who came in from Thailand, and she and her husband had been, from what I could gather from the story, like barely even a couple months in the United States. Her husband spoke Thai and their mother tongue. She only spoke their mother tongue. So the huge and difficult process there was getting a translator on the phone. At first we were attempting to get one who spoke her language, but that just didn't exist in our hospital availability. So I had to translate over the phone to a translator who was then, an interpreter, who was then speaking to this lady's husband, who was then speaking to her as she was going through a pretty rapid and clearly traumatic labor. And couldn't help but think of, if more community-based birth organizations could reach out to refugee and immigrant and other kinds of like people having difficulty accessing care, I feel like we could have done this a whole lot better somehow. If maybe there had been contact with this woman prior, and we can have some continuity of care. So that was just something else that got the wheels turning. I thought that, well, no individual necessarily failed that lady, but I think the system really failed that lady.
Oh, that's so interesting. So this is like somewhat unrelated, but how has the COVID stuff affected your practice?
My equipment has never been cleaner, for one thing.
Right.
And I mean, I say that and I say I would consider myself generally a pretty clean person, but for instance, I don't normally worry about things like blood pressure cuffs from person. And then, COVID has brought this hyper awareness and this hyper anxiety around the fact that I want to be somebody who helps make people healthier, but if I'm not careful, then I could be bringing around something that has a domino effect and ends up really hurting people. So I think that's brought much more awareness to, okay, what about me and what about my equipment has been exposed to this certain person? What about them is affecting me? And so, I mean, as necessary as it is to be thinking this way right now, that's been a major stretcher, is just trying to make sure that, I mean, first of all, do no harm, right? So we're trying not to do harm with our hands, and trying not to do harm with our equipment. I would say that's the primary thing. I think it's also brought a lot of community awareness, though, also sometimes in a positive way. And when it comes to both colleagues and clients and neighbors, I'm really getting a feel for how people view community responsibility and how they view their own role in that. So sometimes that's been encouraging and sometimes it's discouraging, but I've also had to reevaluate my thoughts on that. Like what is my responsibility when it comes to walking around my neighborhood? What's my responsibility when it comes to how I am at a birth? And so I think there's had to be some changes and some trade-offs there, but overall I think and I hope that people's quality of care isn't being negatively affected. I know some people might consider that their midwife having a mask for their entire birth when that's not something they expected. I know that could maybe that is something that's really truly a negative effect for people. And I will be honest, I was at a birth a couple months ago when my client had specifically told me that she thought if she really needed something while she was pushing or if she was in distress, then it was going to be eye contact. And sure enough, she ended up really needing that. And I was really tempted in the moment that, man, I wonder if it would help her if she could see my entire face. But also, like, the situation was kind of a high risk category. And so I didn't feel like I could do that in good conscience. So that's been hard.
Right.
That is really hard. But I think you're talking about the responsibility of it is how Nedra and I have been feeling too, that we have there's a lot of weight to that. You know, it's not just a matter of protecting ourselves, it's a matter of protecting everybody.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just like hang on to that, you know, that little mistaken analogy that you made earlier about swimming uphill. I love swimming. I love the visual of swimming uphill is exactly what is happening right now.
What is it? What was I supposed to say? Swimming upstream.
No,
upstream.
Yes. You fixed it, but you just you started to say swimming uphill and then you corrected it. And I'm like, no, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it is. And you know, it's funny, like you, I would have felt at the beginning of this, I thought my sanitation game was on. And now I realize how many things, you know, the outside of my bags, or setting something in my bag before I wipe it down, or, you know, a number of things have had to change. It's a big difference.
Walking in, I do so my other life, which I didn't explain, which I should have in the summary, is that I sometimes do home health visits too. And so I have some people whom I've been seeing on a consistent basis for the past 3 or 4 years. And it's not that I didn't know this beforehand, but now I'm hyper aware with one client's household in particular that my one client has a husband whom I think must just be against washing his hands ever. But I don't think I've seen him do it once. And so now
I know someone like that. I won't name any names because
not me.
Not at the point where
it's not Gina.
So that's just one thing where I'm thinking I also am not comfortable with giving people the benefit of the doubt anymore. Like, if I touch a table, what if they just touched that same table with really gross hands and I just don't know.
Right.
Nedra's hyper aware of that at all times in all situations.
I was just gonna say welcome to the inside of my head, but
that's not new for her.
No.
It is just so much more thought. We keep talking about Zoom fatigue and COVID fatigue, but there's this mental load with being a healthcare provider at this time. And I find it really frustrating that not everybody is approaching it the same way. And that leads to this, it increases this idea that this is a take it or leave it kind of a situation. It's not. So, I had a thing I was going to ask you. I forgot where I was going with that. So Julia and I have been attending births together for a number of years. Do you remember how long ago the first birth was that you assisted me with?
I was trying to think back about that, and I probably have a record of it somewhere, but I think I was maybe a year into working with my preceptor, and we were just not very busy. Just in terms of not having a big volume of births. So I was looking for other stuff to do. And I think you had enough of a connection with my current preceptor to know that somebody could vouch for me and at least say that even though I was not a licensed midwife, that I could be a useful set of hands at a birth. And so I think we kind of just did a few trial births. I want to say that was probably like 3 or 4, maybe like 3 years ago.
I feel like you've been consistently my primary assistant since probably late 2017, early 2018 is kind of what I would guess. I think a little period of time where I had some more students were getting more advanced and you didn't come to all the births, but
I remember that too.
So yeah, anyway, we've been working together a long time, and you guys have got to do a birth together.
Kind of.
Julia. Kind of. Yeah. Yeah.
So
it was a long one.
I've never gotten a chance to be a birth photographer before, but in this particular birth, it ended up all the roles were taken except the photographer role. So I just grabbed a phone and they wanted pictures.
Took some pictures. Okay.
This is fun. I hope I'm doing it right.
There's some midwives who love to take pictures, and I rarely think about it. Occasionally I'll see a really sweet moment and I'll be like, take the picture. Yeah. Somebody take a picture.
I am not good.
I don't tend to think of it.
One classic example is I took a picture, and this was just like before all of these fabulous birth photographers were out. This was like 20 years ago. And so it was just like the dad standing there holding a baby picture and smiling. So I took this picture, and in the background is the mom with the placenta like on the bed. It was horrible.
So you realize that was not your calling.
I am not. I'm not gifted, and I don't have a gifted eye.
We are really lucky in that we have so many great birth photographers that come to our births already. So I think we're off the hook a little bit.
Yep.
What about, so COVID was a great thing to bring up. What about, that's what I was going to talk about. I was going to say, because of COVID, have you noticed an increase in inquiries? And in fact, you were recently interviewed.
Oh,
right?
Oh, yes. So about the increase in inquiries, I would say yes. And I found that particularly around mid to late March, I was getting a pretty high volume of calls. Not many of those calls, those initial interviews, materialized into like hiring or being hired by new clients, but a handful of them did. I think a lot of people were at least wanted to know what their options were. And a lot of times with the conversations, it would either come up that there was a situation going on that meant that home birth was probably not the right choice for them, or that maybe the couple heard about what kind of responsibility you actually take on in a home birth, and maybe that didn't sound appealing to them. But yes, I was getting a lot of calls. I did get a handful of new clients.
That's true for us too. We got a lot more inquiries than people hiring us too.
Right.
I think people just needed to reach out and have some information and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I like spreading information regardless.
Right.
But yes, I was interviewed by an independent journalist. I want to say I don't actually remember when this was. Probably very late March.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think essentially this journalist had been finding out about the stress going on in people who were far along in their pregnancies or pregnant at all, and beginning to grapple with what their hospital experience was going to look like. And A, like, were they going to be safe from infection? And B, as long as they were safe, would they be allowed to have what they needed while they were giving birth? So we talked a lot about that. And yeah, I basically was able to tell somebody who hadn't heard about it before what the home birth option looks like. So that was kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's really exciting. It's always a we get calls like that too, and Nedra's never interested in being interviewed.
No.
So there's always a little bit of a tension, like, do I want to be interviewed or not want to be interviewed? And
I'm always like, you can do it if you want. I mean, like,
but not interested yourself.
No.
You just don't know. You don't know what the spin on the article is going to be, or what the spin on the story is.
It's true. And so I really felt myself measuring my words as I went through. But
I like lots of caveats.
Yeah, I think the questions were fair. I think the questions were well done.
I think the article was fair too. I think it was a good representation.
I thought the article was really fair. I think the anxiety there was that I wouldn't know which of my words were going to be contributed and how until it was actually out there. But I also didn't feel, I felt like that I would feel more nervous as I was talking to this reporter if it was going poorly, but I didn't. I wasn't really uncomfortable with it at all as we started talking.
Do you feel like you kind of warmed up as it went on? Like,
I think so.
Get the wheels turning a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So we should mention, so you are our associate midwife. You assist us with most of the births, but then you do have your own practice. And what's your URL? www.
So my website is www.generations-midwifery.com, all lowercase. And so that's my spot.
Yeah, just remember that little dash. Is there anything that you want that we should have asked you about you, or?
I don't know. I think you covered quite a bit.
What do you think, Nedra? Anything we should have covered still?
I mean, I always want to know, like, what was the most special story you can think of, or biggest challenge, and I don't know. We might need some more time. We might need to talk to you in a couple of years too.
We're not really tight for time, so we have time for a story.
No. I mean, like, Julia may, she may not have the perfect story yet, but maybe she does. Do you, Julia?
So clarify again. What's the
like? What's the most touching, special, amazing thing that you've seen in your practice so far? Do you have anything yet, or is it still?
I mean, like half a dozen things kind of come to mind in the moment, but I'm trying to pick what would.
It was funny when we asked, while you're thinking about that, while we asked Monet that question, the birth photographer here from Denver, she told the craziest story about a surprise footling breach. It was like, whoa, that was a wild story. So it can be memorable in a like, whoa kind of way, or it can be touching.
Be a whoa story. Yeah.
Well, because I feel like this should be.
It could be while you were a student too.
It doesn't have to. Yeah. Remember, there was one birth I was a part of in Uganda, in a really, really rural birth center there. And this was a context where it was almost unheard of for the husbands or any male at all to be present, unless they were an actual obstetrician. You just didn't include the males in your family in the birth itself. but we did have this one young couple, and the dad had decided with his wife's approval that he really wanted to be involved in the birth. And his involvement and his responses were some of the most touching things I have ever seen.
Aww.
Because I mean, it always is, but I think he also hadn't expected to ever get the privilege of being involved in something like that. And here we were, not only did his wife say it was okay, but here we were, a birth team that was all about including him, which was also kind of uncommon in the region. So I was really glad to be a part of maybe helping build a family like that. So I'm
that's so
gonna go
great
with that one.
Yeah,
It
that's
reminds
great.
me of Call the Midwife. You can see this evolution of the fathers becoming more involved as the series progresses, and
Yeah,
I think it's just
It's really
it's
good.
hard to believe that just that many years ago it wasn't normal, to
Mhm.
have the father's involvement at all. So on our final note, tell everybody about what you like to do in your free time, in your non-midwifery related time.
Mostly things I can't really do right now.
Oh, I hear you,
So,
Julia.
This, yeah, I'm the stereotypical Coloradan, I will say that. I love to ski. I had a Copper Mountain 5-pack this year, and I got to use one of them.
Will you get credit next year?
I don't think so.
Oh no.
I'm gonna call around and ask.
That's so expensive.
It was.
Yikes.
I did get some good Labor Day weekend deals last year on the 5-pack, but yeah, that was really sad. So skiing when we can do that. I was actually going to go up for my second time the weekend that
They closed.
all the ski resorts shut down.
Shoot.
And I do love hiking, and right now I'm trying to strategize about that because I know I definitely could do more hikes much farther away from town, but for midwives that's sketchy at best, and right now it's not really a good idea. And
Right.
the closer to town hikes, the trailheads are very crowded. I know because I've looked and I've stayed in my car and kept on going. Nice, but
Yeah.
the risk assessment thing right now is still really hard because I know most public health officials are saying that outside warm environments are pretty low risk right now, but also there's just a lot of cars and a lot of people at those trailheads. So I'm not sure I can risk it right now. So like right now my hobby is hike hunting, I will say. I hike around. I hunt around for spots that look not too crowded. I also I like jogging around town, traveling when that's feasible. I really love to do that. So yeah, all the things that we will be able to do again one day.
Yeah.
That's a good optimistic way
I
to
know. I want to go on a road trip so bad, and hiking is a challenge. Yeah, it's such a bummer right now. Everything's a bummer.
I mean,
But
Nedra
I
and
guess
I
we have-
have a legit problem with eating out at restaurants, and
Yes,
that has just been like
it
cold turkey,
is.
not a problem.
It is like one of my favorite things to do is to go to cool restaurants and eat. And yeah, so that's a bummer. And the trailheads are super crowded, and only like 10% of the people are wearing any kind of face covering. And it's just like, but
It's hard. It's hard to wear face covering when you're hiking.
I know it, but I do. And it's, and I just like, it's just a bandana.
Up and down.
I just do up and down, and it is a pain in the butt, but it's, I feel like it's my responsibility. So I'm not like getting people sick if I'm asymptomatic, as we have never talked about before. So I won't
in the past 5 minutes.
Yes.
I know, it's true. Oh, I hope things will, I don't know, blow over is not the right word because we know that's not going to happen. So hopefully.
Well, I heard the zoo is going to open up soon.
Oh, really?
And I am going. I cried. I was just like, oh my God, I can't wait to go to the zoo. And it's going to be like super restricted and masks required and you have to have reservations and blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I will do whatever they say. I will do it to a T because I want to go to the zoo.
I will be interested. Well, I'll be interested in hearing what you say after that visit and if you particularly noticed anything different from animals. But second, I'll be interested about zoo research after this. Like, how did the animals react when people came back?
Yeah.
Like after the break from spectators.
I bet they'll be active and curious and not so blasé about us.
Well, I've been hearing some things about, the pandas are mating more, but some animals are mating less, and some of them are just stressed out for what to do, and so I'm really curious.
How interesting. Yeah. Yes, I will let you know when I find out.
Did you not hear about that? The pandas actually mated when they couldn't get into before?
No.
I did not
been watching all the little zoo videos, but I didn't see anything like that go by.
Yeah.
It must not have been like child friendly or something.
The extent of my zoo paying attention was the tiger who got coronavirus. Well, and actually, apparently several of them showed symptoms of I guess they recovered. Did they all recover, as far as we know?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I just think I do have a cat, but she is sheltering in place with me. Consternation. But I figured, listen, this is why we stay inside.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad.
Freddie also has to stay inside because he tried to kill himself. So
our cat is a dedicated indoor cat, so it's not a problem. Once in a while he slips out to the porch and he freaks out because that's not his comfort zone and something could happen. So he's what we call indoorsy. So
mine is an indoor cat. I think he's an outdoor cat.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. It'd be boring to be indoors all the time. We can feel them right now.
Yeah, I wonder what that's like.
Well, Julia, it was so great to talk to you today. Thanks for coming onto the podcast, and thank you for being an awesome assistant. We can always count on you. It's great to be able to call you 24/7 as we do.
Yes,
you're always there and willing to go. So.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, and it was fun to talk with you guys.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. So everybody follow us on social media at metromidwifery.com, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or www.modmidwives.com. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.